Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of July 10th, 2022. Today, we have a debate in store for you on a highly relevant subject for the entire future of humanity, which is the ongoing war in Ukraine and how that war can best be resolved to reduce the existential risks to our species and save the greatest number of lives possible. So before we begin our debate, I would like to introduce our two judges today from the U.S. Transhumanist Party, our Director of Visual Art, Ramon Garcia, and our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. So thank you to both of our judges for agreeing to take part in evaluating the performance of our debaters. Now, our topic today is on the subject of peace in Ukraine. So how do we resolve this war? Right now, the war is at a crossroads because essentially the military forces of the Russian Federation have occupied the entirety of the Lugansk region of Ukraine. They've done so in combination with the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Lugansk. And most recently, the Ukrainian military withdrew from the city of Lysychansk. Now, since that time, there has been a kind of stalemate on the front lines because both sides are operationally exhausted. Both sides have lost tens of thousands of troops. There has been a great loss of equipment, and there has been a great loss of morale. So it seems that it may be more feasible now to effectuate some sort of peace settlement to the situation in Ukraine. Therefore, the key question to be debated is, should the United States and NATO support an immediate negotiated peace settlement in Ukraine, even if it means that the government of Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine would need to make certain concessions to the government of Vladimir Putin in Russia, such as conceding territory, formally conceding any of the territory that has been occupied by the Russian Federation, as well as making certain promises like a promise of neutrality in military conflicts, or a promise of a certain degree of disarmament, or a promise never to join NATO. It's not clear what the parameters of such a negotiated peace would be. So the question to be debated is more general. Should such an immediate negotiated peace settlement be supported in order to stop this war and save as many lives as possible and reduce the existential risk that could arise from the war escalating to a nuclear war? So that is the premise of our debate, and we will hear very different perspectives on this question from our two debaters. Arguing in favor of an immediate negotiated peace in Ukraine will be Nathan Boyd, or Nate Boyd, who earned a bachelor's degree in biology with a 3.98 GPA and who was a laboratory coordinator and manager for the science department at Birmingham Southern College for 11 and a half years after getting his degree. He also holds chemical engineering, math, and pre-med associates degrees, so a highly accomplished individual. He's also active within the Libertarian Party in the United States. So welcome, Nathan. And arguing in opposition to the prospect of an immediate negotiated peace settlement will be Maty Aksenton. Maty Aksenton has followed the conflict in Ukraine in great depth. He is also a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Multidisciplinary Studies from the Departments of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Today he joins us from Israel. So thank you for being with us, especially at this late hour. For our audience, I'm going to go briefly through the logistics of the debate because we are eager to get started. I am going to moderate the debate, and in my capacity as moderator, I am going to be completely impartial as to the content of the debate. Rather, I'm going to make sure that both speakers have the same opportunity to present their points of view and have an equitable time allotment. Our approach to time is going to be a bit different from conventional debates in that I'm not going to cut a speaker off if he goes over his official allotted time. Rather, I would subtract that excessive amount of time from subsequent speaking slots. I think that is more effective in enabling the speaker to get his point across. Also, a speaker isn't obligated to use the entirety of the time for a particular slot. So if a speaker wants to bank his time to be used later on, that's also a prerogative that is available. I have this gavel here from my days as a presiding officer in various debate tournaments. So I will raise this gavel when there's 1 minute in a particular speaking slot remaining. I also have cards for 30 seconds, for 10 seconds, and when it's time, I will raise this card here. So now, without further ado, I would like to ask our affirmative debater, Nathan Boyd, to begin with his opening statement. Nathan, you have 10 minutes. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Okay, so it was last minute, and I questioned whether or not I should write the entire 10-minute assertion for the peace process, or just continue educating myself on why I felt the way I feel. The way I feel is that the Ukrainian war might be a justified war on the part of the Ukraine. I'm not suggesting that they're not justified in standing their ground for democracy. My concern is the time element and the losses that the Ukrainian people and the Russian people also are taking as this conflict goes on past. It started years ago, but it escalated into an all-out war February 24th when Russia invaded the Ukraine. But there were civilian casualties in every year, according to Statista, from 2014 on. They were diminishing, going down in number. 2021 being, I think, 25 civilian casualties or deaths. But still, this is a conflict that has been ongoing, and there have been agreements, but the February 24th invasion didn't buy into the agreements anymore. I'm not saying that Putin is justified in invading. That's not the premise that makes me uncomfortable with why they're not coming to the table, both of them. And the United States doesn't seem to be doing a lot to negotiate terms. And that's my concern, because not only does it affect negatively both Russia and the Ukraine, but it affects globally. The United States has seen an energy crisis, shortages, supply chain shortages, and the world has seen it's more hunger. I'll start reading some of my sources because they say it better than I could. One of them is from the Brookings Institute, asking the question, is time on Ukraine's side? My belief is that no, time is not on the Ukraine side. It's not on Russia's side. It's not on the world's side for this conflict to continue on indefinitely. I'll read. The cracks on the domestic front are more subtle but still clear in their likely impact. The GOP's congressional leadership continues to support large-scale American military aid, but there's a growing GOP bloc that's opposed to it. So if they win control in November, the response to Russia's aggression would be challenged at home and surely weakened. So now might be the best time to come to the table, because if Republicans take control of the House and Senate, then because of the GOP bloc that's opposed to the war, that would put Ukraine in a weakened state. So I think it's a good time for them to come to the table. From Moscow, Putin is banking on just such an outcome. In other words, he feels that time is on his side. I don't feel like time is on Putin's side. Domestically, as the confrontation lingers on, support for it drops, both in Russia and around the world. A second issue is the military. Ukrainian forces have so far prevailed in northern Ukraine, but they're clearly struggling to maintain the position in Donbas. Whether this shattered country, even supported by continuing military aid, can continue to blunt relentless Russian attacks is still open to question. Ukraine's population is less than 1/3 the size of Russia. Its economy is 1/9. The combination of mounting casualties, stunning depletions in military equipment, and dreadful morale problems may cause the Russian offensive to stall and lose ground. But the question stubbornly remains, how much longer can Ukraine hold off a desperate Russia? The third issue concerns the impact of war and of Western sanctions on the Western people. Economic sanctions can do enough damage to the economy to force Putin to readjust his war aims. Whether they can or not remains uncertain. History gives scant cause for optimism. Economic sanctions have rarely, if ever, caused nations to abandon what they regarded as vital national security objectives. If I read further on, it talks about how Putin is willing to use up to nuclear force in order to assert their aggression. That's not good for Ukraine. It's not good for Russia. It's not good for the world, and it's not good for the peace process. I'll move on to a different. This one's entitled "The Consequences of the War in Ukraine Will Be Far-Reaching," and having read up on this, I believe that the consequences will be far-reaching, including the humanitarian impact, Ukrainians needing jobs more than subsidies, a global food crisis, energy challenges, and ultimately it talks about how the world security architecture must be rethought. It's raising questions about national sovereignty, democracy versus autocracy, human rights, and the global world order. That world order, most say that the United States is the world's premier fighting force, but Russia and China come in at second and third, which Russia voted against the fact that for condemnation of what they're doing, but China abstained from the vote, and the economic ties are being solidified between the two powers against NATO, and to see this escalate and not be resolved is damaging to the world, not just to the two players, the Ukraine and Russia. that's the premise for why I'm for the peace process. Just as time drags on, the casualties, civilian casualties mount. The numbers from Statista, and I wanted to go there before I end. Can I find out how much more time I have left?
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Some of the statistics are 4,889 civilian casualties, 335 of them being children, 6,263 civilians injured, 521 being children. And these statistics are sure to go up as long as the war progresses. Damages to residential buildings are estimated at $39.4 billion. That's people's houses and homes. The damage to roads were estimated at $30 billion in US dollars. There's damage to the Ukrainian economy, and some fear the economy will collapse because they're 3 times over what they bring in as far as their GDP in financial losses. Border crossings were interesting. In the refugee migration of people, 4 million people have, over 4 million people have fled to Poland. But interestingly, the next country that comes in is Russia. They fled to Russia at 1,500,000, over 1,500,000. So there are people who saw Russia as their homeland before this crisis, and they fled back to Russia. A professor, Dr. Bata from Air University, said it's hard to say where we're at as far as the unity or Ukraine being a united front. But my position is time is not on anybody's side as long as there's a major war on the planet. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Good job, man.
Yeah, it looks like Gennady might have frozen up.
He made some very good points, though. We could probably just wait for.
But I'm interested in being educated on the justifications as well, because that's part of the process.
All right, I guess we can have. I guess we can have Marty go then. Would you like to go ahead, Marty? We can sort of keep time.
Do you have sources? Maybe we can get the sources ready, so then everybody.
I use Brookings, Statista, University of Energy, and I'll yield back.
It's right here. I can drop that in. Hopefully, then when Gennady comes back, if you have any links, we can drop them into the YouTube chat for everybody to see too. Is that one? Because I think he can only put links in YouTube and stuff.
So should I wait until Gennady comes back before I make my statement?
Yeah, I could keep time right here on this.
Yeah, it's 10 minutes, right?
Yeah. Hello.
Okay.
My apologies. I had a sudden internet outage, but Nathan Boyd, I believe, essentially spoke for his allotted time. So our next segment is the cross-examination, and Maty Aksenton is going to have 3 minutes to cross-examine Nathan Boyd. Now, the questions themselves will not count toward the time. The answers will count toward the time. So, Maty, please begin with posing your first question.
Okay, it's not exactly a question. It's more like some things I want to point out to counter some points Nathan made. Just about his concern that Republicans might win and it will adversely affect aid to Ukraine. I think it's pretty unfounded, considering the fact that so far, whatever domestic animosities Republicans and Democrats translate to their politics in Congress regarding Ukraine, they were pretty much unified. There were very few dissenters. So I think that's a pretty unfounded idea that if Republicans win in November the Congress, they will be any repercussions to aid Ukraine, first of all. Second, something he said about Russia coming second after the United States. If he means militarily, that's, I think it's a, I don't think it's very founded in light of how poorly Russia has been performing in Ukraine so far. And also regarding refugees from Ukraine to Russia, it's worth keeping in mind that many of those refugees to Russia are people that Russia itself kidnapped from occupied areas into its own. So that's also something worth considering.
All right, so I think I will give Nathan the full 3 minutes to respond to those points. Nathan, please begin.
Yes, I don't want to miss the forest for some of the trees. I'll concede all points made in that the Republicans won't have an effect on the situation, that there were kidnappings back to Russia, and that Russia doesn't have the second strongest military. I'll concede all those. And I'll concede to all the justification. It's the toll that the war is taking on not just the Ukrainian people, but on the Russian people and on the world in general, that makes it difficult for me to continue supporting a no holds barred type of approach with the conflict. I expected to talk myself down a little after doing research, but instead I got more concerned due to what I read and I'm not sure if it was The Economist that said, but I did read. Here's The Economist: the war is tipping a fragile world towards mass hunger. Fixing that is everyone's business. Ukraine exports of grains and oilseeds have mostly stopped, and Russia's are threatened. Together, they supply 12% of the world's traded calories. As the war drags on, hundreds of millions more people could fall into poverty. Hundreds of millions of people in poverty is Gandhi thought that poverty was the worst form of violence, and I tend to agree. But to have hundreds of millions of people to be affected by this confrontation just seems excessive, and I would strongly urge that there be a response that comes back to the table on this. Thank you. I'll give it back.
Yes, thank you to Nathan, and you have saved 50 seconds for your future speaking slots. Now we are going to go to the negative opening statement from Maty. Maty, you have 10 minutes. Please begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening and Slava Ukraini, as we like to say. So how should I begin? So basically, as I think, as my opponent agrees that Ukraine has indeed been a victim of aggression by Russia, and Russia has openly and clearly made its intentions clear that it's hell-bent on Ukraine's complete and utter destruction. It's not just some hyperbolic talk on my part. It's there were many publications along those lines in mainstream Russian sources. Very horrible stuff. It's not for the faint of heart. And obviously, I think the most ethical position here, since it's Russia that attacked Ukraine, that Russia, for its aggressive behavior, deserves to suffer a clear and humiliating defeat, while Ukraine deserves a decisive and resounding victory. So how do I define the decisive Ukrainian victory here? That's, of course, restoration of Ukraine's full territorial integrity, which includes Crimea. So basically, I think at this point, forcing a peace settlement on Ukraine against its will, it constitutes an effectively capitulation, and capitulation to nuclear blackmailing, which is a very, very bad idea. Because, I mean, if we are to capitulate to nuclear blackmail, because I mean, if we are to basically give Putin something that he wants because we are so terrified he might start a nuclear war, then what's to basically stop Putin from, let's say, if tomorrow he decides, okay, I'm going to conduct a special operation on denazifying Poland, and what are we going to say? Okay, let him do this, because if we don't, if we stand in his way, he might be upset and press the red button. No, that's ridiculous. So if we are going to stop him, we need to stop him now in Ukraine. And basically, the situation as it stands now, I mean, it's very nice that we are concerned about the future of Ukraine, about the fate of the Ukrainian people, but it would be nice if we are going to if we are going to be concerned about the people of Ukraine, to consult to actually consult the people of Ukraine about what they want, how they want us to help them. So they in Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, they want nothing less than total and complete victory. And I mean, yes, they are suffering, they are having a hard time now as the war drags on, but according to polls that I've read, sadly I didn't save it for the debate, but actually now I've read that according to polls, Ukrainians are far more optimistic about the future of the country during this very trying time than they were during peacetime before the war. So they do have hopes high, but they need our help. They need help from the West, and we in the West, in America and Europe and in Israel, which in my country, which I think has been so far at least officially behaving quite, I think, far less honorably than it should. We all have the means to give Ukraine what it wants, this complete and total victory. Of course, now I will repeat this point that as a victim of aggression, Ukraine has the right to punish its aggressor to the fullest possible extent. And it's one more thing. It's one of the official talking points from the Kremlin about why they attacked Ukraine was they want a neutral status for Ukraine, but the recent accession process of Sweden and Finland to Ukraine, which basically gives Putin another 800 miles of borders with NATO at a spitting distance from his hometown of St. Petersburg. What was his response? He said, okay, I don't mind. We don't have any issues with Finland and Sweden. That, even though it effectively turns the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake, that proved that the whole thing about NATO was a charade. It was a complete red herring. And also regarding the other point, that the other common talking point from the Kremlin, that, oh, we want to defend Russian speakers in Ukraine. And this is also absolutely self-evidently absurd proposition, because I mean, seeing how Russia itself, in the name of defending Russian speakers, reduces countless towns in the eastern Ukraine, predominantly Russian-speaking towns like Mariupol and other towns in the Donbass. I mean, many commentators are pointing out that even Adolf Hitler never had never stooped to such so lowly to bombard German-speaking towns to rubble in the name of defending Germans, you know. So this is utterly absurd. I mean, it's self-evidently ridiculous proposition. So once those two common talking points from the Kremlin have been so resoundingly refuted by observable reality, I think it would be a moral failure of us on our part as a civilization if we fail to give Ukraine the means to achieve total victory. And right now, as we speak, now it's this is here nighttime in Israel as well as in Ukraine. Now, as we speak, the recently provided HIMARS, those highly mobile artillery rocket systems, they are making, Ukrainians are making a very effective use of them by bombarding many ammunition depots in the Russian rear, in depth of Russian controlled territory, which as time goes on, it will actually weaken Russia's ability to proceed. It's right now, slowly but surely, I think with the help of those armaments, Ukraine will turn the tide in its favor. And I think the United States and Europe should do their utmost to accelerate their support to accelerate this process of Ukraine turning the tide of war in its favor. So let's see. And yeah, of course, many people may think that's my position. I'm such a keyboard warrior and I'm armchair hero and all that, and that's true. I am indeed just one guy, not very important. But my position is fully in accordance with the position of the real heroes, all those real heroes who fight in Ukraine against the Russian aggression. And I'm just reiterating what they and the overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian public think, what's on their mind. So I am not advocating anything that goes against the wishes of the Ukrainian people. On the contrary. So thank you very much. And once again, Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Thank you to Maty. And Maty has 25 seconds remaining to save for future segments. Now we go to our cross-examination where Nathan will pose questions and Maty will have 3 minutes to answer. So Nathan, please begin with a question for Maty.
2 points I have a question about. That's the ethical position and how it seems to be a moral failure if we don't support the Ukrainians' wishes wholesalely, and how that is juxtaposed against the value of the human life and all the life that's being lost, as opposed to having the freedom. And as long as the roads are being deteriorated and the schools are being deteriorated and the hospitals are being deteriorated, freedoms are being deteriorated as well. The second question, other than the ethical position, is I read where Zelensky has asked for $7 billion per month, and it was mentioned that we have the means to give the Ukraine what it wants, and I don't think as long as the war continues that will be the case. Ukraine has spent, what I read was 600 billion on its side, and Russia has spent 900 billion on its side. So this is a very expensive confrontation, and I was wondering what our responses to the United States and Israel and the world community and NATO can be to the expense of this, not just in monetary but human life. Thank you.
Yes, Maty, please proceed with your response.
Okay, regarding the expense of human life, once again, of course, every human life that is lost is very tragic, at least on the Ukrainian side. Unfortunately, as cruel as it is, it may sound to some people, at this point, I have very little sympathy to the Russian soldiers who are going to this war as invaders to Ukraine, although they can refuse to go. So long as they go there as occupiers, I consider their lives as forfeit. But Ukrainians are, unfortunately, I want, of course, less Ukrainians to die. And in order, I think, if we indeed give them the means to accomplish their victory, I mean, to turn the tide, to push strong, to push against Russia with more force, with more military might, that will bring the war to a close, to an end faster. That will indeed make save more lives if we give Ukraine the means to defeat Russia as quickly as possible. I mean, regarding, of course, one common point that Nathan raised about food prices and food shortages, and as a result of the war. So right now I've read that after Ukraine driving out Russians from the Snake Island, they now gain some limited ability to export more of their grain through the Danube to the Danube Channel. So, I mean, it's still not a full solution, but it is a partial solution to the problem. It's a step in the right direction. So, I hope things with the HIMARS and all that, things will continue progressing in that direction.
Yes. Thank you, Maty. And I will save 45 seconds for your future speaking slots. So now we have had our opening statements by both debaters as well as the cross-examination. The time comes for one of our judges to pose a question, and this time I will call on Jason Geringer. He has a question for both of the debaters. I know you have several questions in mind, Jason. If you could select the one that you think will be the most salient at this stage, please proceed.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question about both. You actually both agreed on this point, and I disagree with both of you, kind of. The idea that the Republicans, when they take over, whether or not that would change the landscape of our support in the war to Ukraine, and you both seem to agree that no, it wouldn't have an effect. And I'm wondering, why do you think the Republicans would support the war and be anti-Putin? Donald Trump is still in complete control of the Republican Party. The evidence in my eyes supports the conclusion that Donald Trump, and therefore the entire Republican Party, would not just support the war, but be possibly pro-Putin and pro-Russian. Could you please explain why you hold your position on that?
Yeah, right.
Yes. So Nathan, please begin. You have 2 minutes.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I just didn't want that to be a point of contention in the overall picture of the price tag of this war. I agree that a Republican majority in the House would affect how the Ukraine is supported. And I'm still curious about that $7 billion per month price tag that Zelensky himself has called on the world, not just the U.S. and we're assuming NATO as well. Everyone who backs him to come up with this $7 billion, and it's a very high price tag. The other thing is the Prime Minister of the Ukraine has said that he'd like a peace process to come quickly. So I concede to you, Jason. I agree with you. I just didn't want it to be a sticking point, so I conceded it in the debate. Thank you.
Right, I get it. You didn't want us to be seen as jumping into the quicksand of the duopoly and all that. I get it.
Yes, thank you to Nathan for that response, and I will add 62 seconds to your future speaking times. Now, Maty, you have 2 minutes to respond to Jason's question as well.
So, like I said, first of all, since for the most part, except for a small handful of dissenters, the Republicans didn't give any trouble for all the Ukraine supporting bills that passed in Congress so far. So I don't see it changing even if they regain the majority. I don't think that's going to happen. Even during Trump's time in office, the United States provided many armaments that were crucial for Ukraine's victory in the first phase of the war. All those Javelin missiles, they were provided during Trump's time. So, I mean, I think Trump's sympathy towards Putin has been greatly exaggerated in that regard. And also, the main bills have already passed. The Lend-Lease has passed already, so I don't think there are going to be any major obstacles, any additional major bills that would even be necessary to pass in order to give Ukraine all the aid it needs to achieve its well-deserved decisive victory. And also regarding, so I also want to address Nathan's question regarding the $7 billion price tag. I mean, in the West, they already arrested hundreds of billions of worth of assets connected to the Russian government. So if we are so concerned about the price tag, where they can pay with those assets, I think that would be a very logical thing to do in my mind.
Yes, thank you, Maty. And you spoke exactly for 2 minutes, so we appreciate.
I think we lost Gennady again.
I think we did. So, okay, I'll go ahead with my question then. Let's see. Yeah, to me, it seems that it's just a matter of time. Ukraine is going to lose the war. It's just going to, destroy more property, more real estate, kill more people. So I'm thinking it's probably best that rather than continue to give Ukraine billions of dollars to continue funding that war, that U.S. and NATO should just give Zelensky some tactical nukes so that Zelensky could do the same nuclear blackmail against Putin. And I think that would end the war. So how do you feel about U.S. and NATO giving Zelensky some tactical nukes? And we'll go with Nathan first.
I'm conflicted on it. I like the idea of it because I do see the justification for the war to favor the Ukrainians wanting a democracy and freedom. By the same token, I don't like any war escalating into the nuclear arena. The Ukraine actually had nuclear weapons, and they sent them back to Russia in the late 90s, from what I read. Overall, I'm against us giving nuclear weapons to anybody. I would like to see nuclear weapons diminish and us be a part of the nuclear non-proliferation treaties that from the past. So I'm mixed on that. I think I'm not in favor for an escalation to this war, more casualties. That's where I'm for the peace process. Sooner rather than later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. Marty?
Yes. So regarding that, I would be if Western politicians actually had the balls to do such a thing, I would be absolutely in favor to say yes, we are giving Ukraine a bunch of tactical nukes which will destroy a lot. Which will destroy all those Russian forces a lot quicker. And make it clear to put inside if they are not going away, they will use them. Yes, absolutely, all for it. Yes.
All right.
But that's not going to happen. So I will settle for what they are doing now as we speak. I mean, yes, if that would help quickly end the war more quickly, I will be absolutely for it.
I get a little follow-up on that. If do you think it would change the parameters of the negotiation if Putin just at least thought that Ukraine had nukes? What would that do to the? Would that put?
Yes, I do think. Should I go, or do you want to go first, Maty? I'll go ahead and go. I think it would change the dynamics of the talks, but in essence, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind as at play. If they acquired nuclear weapons, Russia has the same capabilities, unless we were to give them a blank check on our nuclear weapons, which I don't see coming. But that's a long ways off, and in the meantime, the war rages on, and so does the financing of the war, not just in money, but in human life. And hospitals and kindergartens and schools are getting terrorized and blown up, and the trauma alone on a mass scale is something to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Maty, go ahead.
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry, I remember the question.
Is, what do you think? How would the parameters change in the negotiation between Ukraine and Russia change if Putin simply thought that Ukraine? So, in other words, even if Ukraine didn't have him, what would just the threat of that do to?
I mean, if I believe since Putin is what in Russian known the word is gopnik, since he's a gopnik and as such understands only the language of force, I do believe if he knew that here Ukraine acquired some tactical nukes which will can cause a lot of havoc and bring him to a resounding defeat in this conflict, he would back down very quickly, I believe, because I mean he cannot he cannot on his side use since he's the aggressor, he cannot in his mind justify using his own nukes as to tip the scales in his favor, because I mean I think he, for no other reason, he understands that he will be eliminated immediately by the West if he resorts to that. But from the Ukraine side, since everyone understands that they are the party that's under attack, I mean, the potential of them using tactical nukes to tip the balance in their favor is it's much more favorable. The political environment for that. You understand what I'm saying? I'm just maybe I just mixed up a bit.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying?
Thank you, Maty and Jason. I appreciate you picking up the conversation with your question since I was unfortunately disconnected for a time.
Actually, Art had to pick it up. I'm not kidding. I had a huge bumblebee fly in my window and it was freaking me out while I was off camera.
I asked if it would be interesting or a good strategy if the West just gave Zelensky some tactical nukes, since obviously just conventional weapons are going to cost a lot of money, drag out, and create more destruction. So that was my question.
What would China say would also be a point I would like to make on the nuclear capability of Ukraine.
Yes, so let's go to the rebuttals now. And with the rebuttals, each of our debaters is going to have 5 minutes to address everything in the debate thus far. We have a bit of a structural change in that the second question sequence has essentially been posed. So keeping that in mind, we'll have the affirmative rebuttal, then the negative rebuttal, and then audience questions. I will select what I think is the most salient audience question for each of the debaters. So now, Nathan, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal, essentially addressing the points that Maty has made thus far and your responses to those points.
What hasn't been, Maty, I think, brought up Sweden and Finland joining NATO and the expansion of NATO in that area. And interestingly enough, I don't oppose that. I don't like seeing NATO get expanded, but I can understand, empathize, and support Sweden and Finland being members of NATO. So I'm not against that. I think we have to look at the holistic picture of what happens in the globe, across the globe, if we we fight a proxy war, in essence, being the sugar daddy of Ukraine, so to speak. I'm not for toppling governments, and I think Russia is trying to topple the government in Ukraine to some degree, certainly in the eastern regions, because they feel like their sovereignty has been challenged there. That's my understanding. But by and large, I still think it's a bad idea to continue one more day, one more week, one more month, or wait till Republicans do or don't take the House and Senate in November. The cost to this war is just something that, as a transhumanist, I have to remember that it's not just people, it's not just price tag, it's in health, science, and technology collaboration. We have our university system, which welcomes the Chinese, the Russians, across the globe. We look for the best scholars, and I hate to see our advancements in the Transhumanist Party come to a slowdown because there's a unmanageable war going on in the Ukraine. War is unpredictable, and we can't say whether or not the casualties will be too much for anyone on this planet if nuclear war is escalated on both sides of the coin. I'll yield back. I know that wasn't 5 minutes, but I'll yield back.
Yes, thank you to Nathan, and I will add 146 seconds to your future speaking times. Now, Maty, it is time for your rebuttal, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, so like I said about Nathan's concern about global hunger, I say that's being partially addressed as we speak now that Ukraine can transport its grain to the Danube Channel. That's it's still not the perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction, I think. Of course, I want to see the war ending quickly. No less than Nathan, but like I said, I think I want to see it coming to a close as quickly as possible through decisive Ukrainian victory. So no other regimes out there. I mean, Putin is not the only bully in the neighborhood with nuclear weapons. We have, of course, China still out there. We have potentially Iran might acquire it sometime in the future, which is, of course, a direct threat to my country. And I would not like this regime to use the same tactic around here. And that's, utterly intolerable, the idea that some bullies with nuclear weapons can get any achievements, to get any victories. That will open floodgates to many more such aggressive tactics from other regimes, if not from Putin himself, who will be greatly emboldened by if he gets any victory from this conflict. So that's what I'm saying. In case somebody might be confused about it, I am not at all in this conflict. My primary motivation is not the territorial integrity of Ukraine per se, but it is to make a principled stand against such behavior of conducting an aggressive war of conquest under the threat of a nuclear catastrophe. This is, I think, it's something that is utterly intolerable. We just not something that we can allow if we want to live in a civilized world where human cooperation is possible, where the rule of law is supreme and not might is right, ethic is supreme. If we end up living in a world where might is right is the supreme ethic, it's not going to be a very conductive world to global progress, scientific and otherwise. Not at all.
No, I agree.
"90 seconds to your future speakings." So now we have concluded our rebuttals, and we now enter into our audience question segment. I'm going to pose a different audience question to each of the debaters. And the reason why I do that is because I want to pose what I think will be the most challenging question for that debater. And with regard to Nathan, Rudy Hoffman has a question. He asks, if we give Russia land in former Ukraine to go away now, what happens in future years if and when the Russian government decides to take more land? Now, Rudy does write so that we can accurately represent his position here. However, if we weigh the cost of losing part of Ukraine to the global cost of nuclear war, that is not even a close concern. Is what would be the effects of giving away land now? So Nathan, if you could address Rudy's question, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
I think that unfortunately will be part of the negotiating process, is to cede land over to Russia. I wish we didn't have to, but I believe a compromise is more important than bloodshed and a blank check to support Ukrainian sovereignty in all regions. There is a Russian minority still in those regions, but many of them have fled back to Russia. I think the question of boundaries and territorialism is a difficult one to answer as far as what will happen if we give them land or don't give them land, and then they come back and want more land. We take it piecemeal at a time, is my position, and it's unfortunate that any land has to be ceded. But those are the dynamics of the modern world and the nuclear capabilities we all have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nathan. And I am going to add 43 seconds to your future speaking times. And now for Maty, we have a question from our friend Alan Crowley. So he wonders, what is the priority here in terms of resolving this conflict? Is it to stop the loss of life or to take the fight to Russia as punishment? And I think the implication of that question is there could be a conflict between those two goals. So if defeating Russia is going to cost tens of thousands more lives, including Ukrainian soldiers and civilians' lives at the least, what is the priority here? Whereas a peace settlement could save those lives so that those people don't have to die.
So my answer is that such, I think, questions, questions along those lines are, any idea that of let's say going for a peace settlement now, which I think is effectively a capitulation to nuclear blackmail, is a bit short-sighted in terms of saving life, because if you embolden bullies in the future, you are actually giving them appetite to wage more wars in the future, which will cost even more lives in the future. So if we want to save more lives in the long run and make our world more conducive to life in long run, to more conducive to freedom, it has to end with decisive Ukrainian victory and with completely and utterly humiliating Russian defeat. To, let's say, that should also send a signal to China, which now has its eyes set on Taiwan. So it will also know that should it try any funny business there, it might also suffer a bunch of losses, so it shouldn't do it. Because after all, Putin invaded Ukraine because he sensed weakness. Like all bullies, bullies attack when they sense weakness, and he attacked Ukraine. He thought Ukraine is weak, understandably, because it was so corrupt and dysfunctional in many ways, of course. So he thought, well, it's a very weak country, we can take it in a few days, and he miscalculated. That's so you see, that's so saving more. So basically, to save more lives in the future, we need to have this conflict concluded with the complete and utter defeat of Russia. Yes.
Thank you, Maty, and you spoke for exactly 2 minutes. So we appreciate both debaters' responses to the audience questions. And our final formal segment of the debate will be concluding statements. So each side will have 5 minutes to essentially recapitulate the debate, why they believe their position is superior, any additional responses that they may have to the other side or to any of the judges or audience members or anything else they want to say on the subject. Here we will switch the order a bit and start with the negative concluding statement so that we allow Nathan to finish because he's advocating in the affirmative for our main question. But Maty is going to go first. And Maty, you have quite a bit of time here because you saved 160 seconds. So that means you have a total of 7 minutes and 40 seconds for your concluding statement. Please begin.
Okay, so I actually don't have much to add besides the points I already made, that going for a peace settlement now without a decisive Ukrainian victory is, I think, it would be an effectively a capitulation to nuclear threat, which will embolden not only Putin but many more bullies out there to conduct themselves in a similar fashion, which will cost a lot more lives than it would save it will cost a lot more lives in the long term than it would save in the immediate term. And like I said, my position of wanting complete and total decisive Ukrainian victory in the total Russian defeat is one that is shared by the overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian population, of course, by all the real brave heroes who are fighting this terrible war as we speak. So that's their position as well. It's not just a position of me, keyboard warrior and an armchair hero. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a bit.
Can you tell me more about the might is right aspect of it?
Regarding that, so basically anyone who thinks he can just come and occupy a bunch of territories against the will of the people living there, against their wishes, in an aggressive war, without any repercussions, that, like I said, embolden a lot of tyrants and bullies out there to conduct more wars of aggression, which will again cost a lot of more lives. And I think that's pretty self-evident. I mean, it's not rocket science that capitulating to bullies just emboldens them. And when going against them, when responding to force, they will walk back and walk back on their position when they meet force, when they meet a forceful response. And what else?
If you have any comments as to why you think the judges or the audience should vote for your side of the debate.
You mentioned that regarding that reminded me what I had. What my train of thought that I just lost, that's regarding the result of the debate. So regardless of whether I'm judged as a winner or as the loser, I can rest assured that my position is fortunately shared not just by the people of Ukraine, but also by many important Western decision makers. They already lean towards my position, and I'm glad about it, that they already lean towards my position. Maybe, of course, I may think they don't supply Ukraine with enough aid fast enough, and they don't supply Ukraine armaments fast enough, in my mind, and in the minds of many people, similar like-minded people, but they lean in that position, fortunately. So I am, regardless how people vote for me or against me, my conscience is clear. I feel good about the way things are going, more or less.
Thank you, Maty, and we appreciate your concluding statement. And now we will move on to Nathan Boyd for the affirmative concluding statement. Nathan has saved a lot of time, so he will have 10 minutes and 1 second should he choose to use all of that time. But please feel free to begin and encapsulate your view of the debate.
Wow. Well, maybe I'll read from not from Brookings, but from the consequences of this war that was read in the World Economic Forum, and I had that. If you'll bear with me, I'll try and find where it was, and I can talk about the. Excuse me, just for a sec. Consequences.
And while you look for that, feel free to make any other points.
The point here it is. The Russian invasion into the Ukraine will have far-reaching consequences in a variety of areas. The situation has evolved into a humanitarian crisis. It's turned food and energy security volatile and raises the question of architecture and global security. They aren't limited to Ukraine because we live in a globalized world. We haven't talked about cybersecurity and what's happening on that front, or the farmlands that aren't being tilled or planted with seed for wheat, for corn, for sunflower oil, which Ukraine supplies 50% of the world's sunflower oil. I read, I think it was 12% of wheat to the world. It could feed 400 million people pre-invasion, but now it hasn't been planted, so that food will not be available to be harvested. These three charts, I'm at, by the way, I'm at the consequences. I'm at the World Economic Forum. The consequences of war in the Ukraine will be far-reaching, and the author is Natalia Katzer-Buchowska. I think my position is that we haven't come to the table with everything that the Ukraine wants, nor are we going to be able to. The globe is not united. 75% of the globe condemned the war, but big countries like China and India abstained from the vote. So they took no position, or they took a position of we'll wait and see. If China, India, or other major players don't see a moral imperative to win the war, maybe we can engage them in the process of what can be done for the Ukrainians, and see if they're just afraid of Russia, or if they agree with Russia that the Russian minority in Ukraine needs protection too, and they were losing those protections. I don't know whether I agree with Putin on they need protection, but I consider one human life more important than ideology, and we have too much human life going to waste. I don't think we've used all of our resources in coming back to the table and just opted for a solution of providing armaments with our military and industrial economy. And I don't think that's a transhumanist principle that we win with might. We win with argument and education. And I think an education campaign would further our ability to get back to the table, because I haven't heard anything. The last talks were shut down in Turkey, and maybe we could get incorporated a more diplomacy, more State Department outside of America to come back to the table. I know Macron had an interest in in seeing the war end. Italy put forth a proposal. Poland put forth a proposal for peace. So there are proposals that are being floated around, and I'd like to see. I tried to get Italy's proposal. It's a 4-point proposal. I wasn't able to download it because I didn't have subscriptions to the source material. So it was a little bit of I only had a day and a half to prepare, and I couldn't get all the sources that I need. But peace proposals have been put out there. It was the Vatican News that I was reading about Italy's peace proposal. It was shot down, saying it was too soon. But I don't think it's too soon to ever be at the table. And I do still, in light of all the arguments, I do, even though it might be a holy war, a justified war on the part of Ukraine, the reality is might sometimes equals to the winner go the spoils. And I think that's the case in this case, to the winner go the spoils, and Russia is clearly more capable of outmanning Ukraine, especially because no country has stepped up to the plate in ways that would be convincing as to put an end to this confrontation. That's all I've got.
Yes, thank you very much, Nathan. We appreciate your concluding statements. So both of our debaters have now formally presented their case. I'm going to ask each of the members of our YouTube audience, both on my channel as well as the KGRA channel, to make a comment in the chat with the name of the debater who you think had the stronger arguments in the debate, not even necessarily whose arguments you agree with the most, but whom you found to be most persuasive within the structure of this debate. And I will tabulate the votes over time. Each of our audience members is going to have 1 vote, and each of our judges is going to have 2 votes, because as judges, you have the option to either allocate both of your votes to one debater or the other, or to declare a tie in your view, in which case you allocate 1 vote to each of the debaters. So while we're tabulating the votes from the audience, let us hear from Art Ramon with regard to your decision in this debate. Which side did you favor, if either one?
Yeah, right now I'm going to give 2 votes to Maty. At the very start of the war, I would have sided with Nathan to put a quick end to the conflict. But now that it's dragged on, it's bankrupting the U.S. And I believe Russia's still going to win if they're just going to use conventional weapons. I'm going to side with Maty. Definitely, Ukraine needs some tactical nukes so they could, do the same thing and nuclear blackmail Russia. At the same time, we should also give tactical nukes to Taiwan. And I don't see any other way around it. It's just going to keep dragging on. And if you truly want to cut to this chase and end the conflict, let's just go ahead and hand out those tactical nukes. And let's see who really wants peace, So 2 points to Maty.
All right, so Art Ramon assigned 2 points to Maty, and now we have Jason Geringer. Jason, please go ahead.
Sure, I can kind of run through a little bit of Nathan made some good points. It's always, peace is always pretty much the right side usually, right? So I gave him a point there, just in my own head for my own calculating. But I gave him another point about the Republican thing, because I think that is a thing in favor of peace now before the Republicans get in office. So that I gave 2 there to Maty. I gave Maty another. The other 2 were for Nathan, and then for the whole authoritarianism versus democracy thing, I have to give Maty a point for that one. And then from Rudy's comment about, even it's, and which ties into Maty's point about the bully, and that if you concede, it will actually cause more attacks in the future, and that whole line of reasoning, I think is probably more correct, that it may not even stop it, even if we were to sit down. It eventually, wouldn't really stop it. And then, better off in the long run. I had to give one for Maty on that one, that we would be better off in the long run with the defeat of Russia than we would be without. If it stays this way, he's just going to keep doing it. So I ended up, I got to go with Maty. It was like, I got 4-2 on here, so I'm going to give them both my points. So.
All right. Thank you to Jason. And
it's a good argument by Nathan, though. I'm just saying, you did a good job.
Yes, we appreciate both of our judges providing their feedback. Now, I still want to leave a bit more time for our audience to respond in the chat, because there are some who still haven't provided their feedback, who I know were commenting in the chat. So while this happens, I want to highlight some of the other comments that our audience members made throughout the debate. And there was an interesting observation by Sergei Gubkin, who wrote, "It seems like Nathan is a realist who sees dictators are here to stay and we need to find a way to live with them to reduce wars, while Maty seems to take the position that dictatorships should not be tolerated." And I would ask either of you, Nathan and Maty, do you think that's an accurate characterization of your positions?
Can I start?
Yes.
I would not say it's exactly an accurate characterization. I think regarding if dictators should not be tolerated, I mean, of course, they are all bad and the world would be better off without them, but I'm actually a realist in the sense that I understand that they are still going to be around for a while. They are not going anywhere. I mean, I'm not some naive optimist that believes that the United States can just go there and make all the dictators go away. I mean, that's was a very bitter experience for this century when it tried similar things in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's was ended up costing to Americans a lot in blood and treasure. What I'm saying is that okay, yeah, well, there will be dictators here and there on our planet, but once they start being aggressive outwardly, like Putin now in Ukraine or Saddam was in Kuwait in '91, that's something where should be where we should all draw a red line, that we cannot tolerate wars of conquest. Yet tyrants will be there, and there are many ways to help promote freedom that don't involve the use of hard power. I think basically I believe America should use its hard power very sparingly in promoting freedom. But when there are dictators that are starting to exceed their boundaries, that's when invading and conquering territories, that's where all bets are off. You understand? Yeah, that's where the red line should be drawn, not about the existence of dictators, which will always be there, unfortunately, but about tolerating dictators waging brutal and aggressive wars of conquest. That's utterly should not be tolerated in on our planet.
Thank you, Maty, for clarifying your views on dictatorships. And now, Nathan, could you address the characterization that Sergey made of your position?
I think he got me down pretty much. As far as realism goes, we do have dictators on this planet. It's not limited to Putin. Might versus right goes both ways. And just because the United States is strong enough to give nuclear weapons to the Ukraine or to Taiwan doesn't mean that we should. I'm against an escalation of this or most wars. I haven't found a war that I've been for since I was for the Revolutionary War. But other than that, war in general is not the side I like to go in. I had another point, but I lost it. I believe the transhumanist position is one of education, one of technology, one of science, and I don't think we've used that well enough because war is still raging on our planet. Others see the United States as a bully, and that's why certainly Russia does with the sanctions that we put on, and that's why they did what they did. So might equals right is not a principle that I like to use, even if we can blow them to smithereens. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Nathan, for that clarification. And I will point out the U.S. Transhumanist Party in Section 3 of its platform does support nuclear disarmament, as well as Section 4 of its platform, because in great part of the potential for an accident or a misunderstanding that could escalate and lead to the extinction of the human species. So even if neither side wants to deploy nuclear weapons, even if Putin is bluffing when he's saying that Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons, even if the United States has no intention to make a nuclear first strike, it is very easy for signals to be confused, especially in this time when communication is often highly suboptimal, to say the least, when the two sides treat each other with great suspicion. So if there is a false alarm about a nuclear attack, there may not be as much generosity in terms of assuming that it was an accident. Rather, many in the military command structures of both sides might assume that it is an intentional first strike attack from the other side. So Sections 3 and 4 of the USTP platform definitely are opposed to nuclear proliferation and support nuclear disarmament. Now, we continue to have votes coming in, and I am tabulating them as they come in, but we do have about 26 minutes remaining in our stream today, so please cast your votes soon so that we can have a decisive tabulation of the results. So we have other comments here in the chat. So Rudy Hoffman says, I've heard it said some people only understand a punch in the nose, and this was one of the threads in the debate that Maty emphasized. Maty, is it correct to say you only believe that Putin understands the language of force, so if you give concessions to him, he will take more, but if he is defeated, he will not escalate in order to try to compensate for his defeat? And if that's the case, how would you respond to Putin's own analogy that he made of the cornered rat that he encountered in Leningrad when he was young, and he saw this rat furiously fighting for its life because it had no other options? Do you think that's a safe position to put Putin in, or is he likely to strike back with even greater vengeance if he feels cornered, if he feels like he has no other options but to initiate a nuclear attack?
So, like I already said in this debate, while you were offline, Putin is a gopnik. You are, I think, obviously familiar with that phrase, a fellow Russian speaker. He's a gopnik who, yes, absolutely understands only force. So, from regarding the cornered rat analogy, I think there is a very good reason to assume that he is indeed deathly, extremely afraid of dying. He might be indeed our fellow immortalist, not in the sense that he's some visionary transhumanist, but just for his own vainglory might want to live forever and very much afraid to die. I think even if the question comes to whether escalate to a nuclear war, which will be which will guarantee his own demise, or losing his power and probably standing trial for his crime, I think he will prefer the latter option over the former, I think. I mean, with Ukraine, he badly miscalculated, obviously. So right now, as we see with the expansion of NATO towards with the imminent accession of Sweden and Finland, he, instead of resorting to threats, instead of escalating his threats against those countries, instead of threatening to, let's say, send forces to occupy Gotland or anything like that, he just says, okay, I don't mind, we don't have problem with that. Basically, he didn't say it in those words exactly, but that's his main message. We see that now that with their NATO membership more imminent, he actually pushed back. He pushed back his forces that he amassed on the Finnish border a few weeks ago. He just took them probably to for reinforcements in Ukraine, but I mean, he took them away from Finland. He didn't reinforce the Finnish border as a response. So yeah, we see that it is working. The language of power is working. Yes.
So this is interesting, and indeed Putin's response on Finland and Sweden joining NATO has been rather milder than most in the West have expected. On the other hand, Putin has this view that Ukraine is historic Russian territory, whereas Finland was a part of Russia for a time from the late 18th century to the rise of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, there was the Russo-Finnish War in 1939-1940, where Russia annexed a little bit of territory from Finland, but Finland remained independent and neutral since that time. So that is an interesting question to consider. So what do you think Putin's real motivation is in the invasion of Ukraine? If it's not to stop NATO expansion, as thinkers like John Mearsheimer or Henry Kissinger have argued, what is Putin's actual goal here?
I think his goal is just he cannot indeed stand seeing a piece of his empire becoming part of the West. He's very much terrified of seeing a country populated by people who are very much similar to Russians in many ways, speak either Russians or I mean, almost all Ukrainians, of course, speak Russian. And I think he's very much terrified seeing such a country becoming a successful and prosperous democracy on his border. And also another motivation that was talked a lot by Peter Zeihan, that might also be an explanation about Russia being paranoid about being invaded from all kinds of directions there, among which is two of which he said Peter Zeihan spoke about 7 such directions, of which 2 is in Ukraine. But basically, even if Putin could somehow win and conquer all of Ukraine, that would be of no use to him. But that's, I think, also part of the motivation. You should listen a bit to Peter Zeihan's thesis on this subject.
Yes, thank you for the recommendation. And Zeihan has been mentioned in the chat by several of our viewers as well. Now, I have a twofold question with regard to a comment that you made. You suggested that Putin might share our interest in life extension, and I am curious as to what information you're aware of in this regard, because anything that's related to longevity and health with regard to Putin is a bit murky in terms of Western audiences being aware of it. Also, our friend John H. has a related question. Whatever happened to Putin's cancer? So there have been a lot of allegations in Western media that Putin is not well. He is in poor health, and there have been certain media appearances that seem to suggest this, where his hands were shaking or he had to steady himself. But there were more recent appearances where he seemed more confident, more relaxed, like when he was talking to a group of young entrepreneurs. He seemed to be back in control of his faculties. So in conjunction with his interest in longevity, do you think he has real serious health issues, or is he just preemptively concerned about his health, which is why he surrounds himself with doctors?
Regarding his quest for longevity, I mean, I don't have any concrete evidence. It's more based on I think what can be called informed speculations from various commentators. I mentioned to you one Russian political exile, Gennady Gudkov. You know the name? He mentioned something along those lines. He's been pretty close to various prominent Russian political figures, including Putin, with whom he's familiar a bit more. He's not a close acquaintance of Putin, but he's more closer than any of us, obviously. So another, of course, circumstantial evidence is that all this talk about, I mean, first of all, him sitting around on those very, very long tables, if he's afraid that somebody might either attack him or infect him or whatever. You know, those now notorious long tables. They obviously indicate that it's a person that is very much afraid for his own life, at the very least. So, like I said, we don't have, as far as I know, I haven't found any concrete evidence, but I think there are very good indicators that he's not a person who is willing to die very soon. So that's also comes back to the point regarding his cancer. I think there is a possibility that he does have it, but like I said, that the fact that he's surrounded by a whole bunch of doctors does not mean that he's necessarily that his death is imminent. It might also mean, it might be the case that he does have cancer, but also all those doctors that he's keeping close to himself, they will probably, there is a good chance that they will prolong his life for a long time, like Arkady Babchenko spoke about this very point, that there is no reason to believe in Putin's imminent death. He has access to the world's best medicine, so there is a chance that they will prolong his life for many more years to come. So we should obviously hope they will fail, but we should be prepared to for the possibility they will succeed. But I will also add in this regard that if he is indeed shares our desire for life extension, for immortality, I very much wish him to achieve his immortality and spend his entire immortality in a jail cell for as punishment for all the crimes he committed.
Thank you for that response, Maty. And I would like to acknowledge this generous super chat from our friend Alan Crowley. He writes, "Great Salon. Hard to divide a vote between these two." And I have tabulated all the votes that have come in thus far. I will provide 10 more minutes for people who haven't voted yet to cast their votes. In the meantime, Jason has a question for both of the debaters. Jason, please proceed.
Woo! Shout out to Alan Crowley. Yeah, I got a question for both of you. What leverage if we sat down at the table right now, what leverage would we have in that negotiation against Putin? And what are some things that we could maybe do to get some leverage in that situation? If timing is of the essence, when would be, do you think, the most opportune time to be able to get Putin down at the table and talk to him? So, any ideas? I think we lost.
We lost. Yes.
Yes. So,
yeah, I'm wondering when would be the best time to bring Putin to the table? What are some things that might make the negotiation more in Ukraine's favor? Because in a negotiation, it's all about leverage, and he really doesn't have a whole lot of incentive to even come to the table if he's winning, right?
No, I don't think he's winning. It's not quite right. Right now, it's still situation is right now is a stalemate, but I think it is slowly but surely switching in Ukraine's favor with all those HIMARS systems that are already there and blowing Russian ammunition depots as we speak. But I think the only possible leverage the West might have right now against Putin is this whole bunch of sanctions they put against Russia, but I don't see this being very effective. I'm not very optimistic that this will have much of an effect. I think the only possible leverage will be when there is going to be a decisive Ukrainian victory. Only that. I don't see, besides possibility I don't see only a decisive Ukrainian victory.
Yes, it looks like Nathan has something to say on this as well. So, Nathan, I have unmuted you. Please proceed. So, what do you think is the diplomatic leverage that the United States or NATO could currently have in this conflict in Ukraine?
I think the sooner the Ukrainians come to the peace table, the better off for them. I think Russia's in a position where they can wait this out. They have more resources. They have they're not being their roots.
I think we're having some
bombarded.
Yeah, we're breaking up.
Yes. So I think Nathan was saying that Russia is in a better position to wait out this conflict relative to Ukraine because the Russian land is generally not being attacked. though there are some border missile strikes now on certain Russian cities, but the Russian population isn't being devastated the way the Ukrainian population is, and their infrastructure isn't being destroyed. So, Nathan, you think that time is more on Russia's side than on Ukraine's side in this conflict. Would that be an accurate characterization?
Yes.
So, Maty, would you like to respond to that assessment? In essence, as this war has dragged on, Russia has generally occupied more territory. There have been some Ukrainian counteroffensives, but right now the total amount of territory occupied by the Russian military in the Donbass is greater than it has ever been. And it seems that as time advances, more cities get destroyed, more civilians get killed. And if there had been a ceasefire in March or April, indeed, if the war had taken 3 days as the Russian high command initially intended, many fewer people would have died, and the land, the infrastructure, the buildings in Ukraine would have been in much better condition. So how would you address that type of analysis?
Well, first of all, regarding the claim that time is on Russia's side, I don't think that's the case. I mean, Ukraine, while it is indeed being devastated as we speak, it's actually now I mean, it's in better position than it was back in February or early March. Back then it was attacked from like 5 directions. Now it's been basically a little bit attacked only in the Donbass region, and that attack already being weakened, has been significantly weakened after they pretty much exhausted themselves to achieve their tactical victory in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And now Putin is talking about an operational pause. Of course, Ukrainians are not going to pause. They are very much using this so-called operational pause to bombard all those ammunition depots and other strategic points with those HIMARS. And of course, Putin now, I think the fact that he's now resorting to rocket attacks, to wanton rocket attacks all over Ukraine, that's a sign of desperation, not unlike what we have seen back from Hitler towards the end of 1944, when he was rocketing Britain with V2 rockets. Yeah, he can terrorize a bunch of people and kill a bunch of Ukrainians, unfortunately. Yeah, that's indeed very tragic and all that, but that will not bring him closer towards his desired strategic
Can you
victory.
explain that? What makes you think that it's a sign of desperation that they resort to rockets? What about those weapons make it that way? I mean, I believe you, but I'm just wondering.
Because, I mean, they are just bombing civilian building here, civilian building there. Often many of those rockets are either intercepted by Ukrainian anti-air defenses. Many of them get intercepted, and it's pretty costly rockets, and they are not very accurate. And they are not basically right now at this moment. Those the most important asset on the Ukrainian side are those HIMARS, those trucks, those artillery trucks, those trucks that shoot those very precise rockets, and those trucks are mobile. And basically, there's not much that Putin can do against those, because basically he can't use now helicopters or airplanes, because Ukrainians already amassed a lot of anti-air defenses that will guarantee that not most, any airplane that will try to destroy those trucks will be shot down. You know, at the beginning of the war, they were shooting down a lot of planes when all those planes and helicopters were flying across Ukrainian sky. But now, in recent 2 months or so, they were shooting down far less because simply Russians stopped flying those aircraft systems into the depths of Ukrainian territory, because they know they will get shot down. So there are basically a lot less aircraft flying, and so therefore a lot less getting shot down from the Russian side. You understand?
Yes. So thank you, Maty, for that response. And we do have 4 minutes remaining in our salon today. So I would like to tabulate the final votes as they have been cast by our judges and our audience members. So if you recall, both of our judges assigned 2 of their points to Maty. And with regard to our audience members, we had 3 voting that Nathan had the stronger performance in the debate, and 4 of our audience members voted that Maty had the stronger performance in the debate. So the total point count is 8 for Maty and 3 for Nathan. So congratulations to Maty in this debate. Thank you for sharing your insights and your arguments, and thank you also for Nathan. I will say the case for peace is immensely persuasive in my view, and you have done a fine job in researching the arguments for peace and providing some sources and information about how that peace settlement, if it were achieved in the near future, would be beneficial. And we need to continue to monitor this situation from an existential risk perspective as well, which was touched on during the debate, because as tragic as this war in Ukraine is right now, it would become even more tragic if it were to escalate beyond the boundaries of Ukraine and have the risk of bringing in the NATO powers. And I would like to pose one final question. This will need to be answered in the next 2 minutes, but I think it's relevant to the notion that the war might escalate. And this is a question from our friend John H., who asks about Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is not contiguous with the rest of Russia, and it's separated from Russia by Lithuanian territory, and Lithuania has essentially refused to allow the transport of Russian goods to Kaliningrad, which could provoke a reaction from Russia. So either of you, do you foresee that move as posing a risk of escalation into a broader conflict?
I think, I mean, after Putin started a full-blown war against Ukraine, we can't, of course, rule out anything. There's nothing, we can't rule out anything, including, of course, unfortunately, a full-blown nuclear war. But I think, considering the fact that he miscalculated with Ukraine quite a bit, to put it mildly, I don't think he's going to try any direct military action against Lithuania. I think what's more likely, he might do play some dirty games there, maybe do some sabotage in Lithuania, possibly. That's a possibility there. But no, I don't see him escalating, because I think he knows that if he tries any military action against Lithuania, which is a NATO member, he knows that instantly he will see a whole squadron of B-2 spirits, which will turn his what's left of his army that hasn't been crushed in Ukraine, it will be crushed in a few minutes by a single flight of a squadron of B-2 Spirits. And I think Putin, I don't believe Putin will miscalculate here, will do such a miscalculation here. But once again, who knows? We can never rule out completely. But once again, I think nuclear escalation is a very low probability for the reasons I mentioned, because, like I said, he knows that he probably knows that if any attempt at using nuclear weapons to tip the scales in his balance will bring immediately to his own demise.
Yes, so thank you, Maty. Unfortunately, we are out of time, though, Nathan, I would be interested in your thoughts on the Kaliningrad situation after this salon concludes. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our judges, and of course to our two debaters, Nathan Boyd and Maty Aksenton, who very capably represented both sides of the question of whether there should be an immediate negotiated peace agreement in Ukraine. And Maty, I hope that you're correct, and I hope that Putin will not resort to the use of nuclear weapons over Kaliningrad, though he has, as you point out, severely miscalculated in the past. So thank you for everyone's participation and insights. And until next time, live long and prosper.
Thank you very much.